questions? Do we have a recommendation on this one?
Yes, I'd like to recommend that we go ahead and move this into a consent agenda.
Sounds good. Next up, we have our comprehensive plan update restart with Brian Scott.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm muted here. So state statutes require that we maintain a comprehensive land use plan. We've done this since the late 1960s, the most recent edition being adopted in 2007. So we are due for kind of a review of our comprehensive plan and an update to make sure that our comprehensive plan is compatible with the values of the community and land use development trends that are emerging. So with that, we developed an RFP last summer, and we kind of put that out to the community of planners that do this kind of work. We ultimately interviewed, I think, 5 firms in August, almost a year ago, and we selected Confluence of Kansas City to help us in this process. We got that contract approved by you all in the late fall, and then we did an initial kickoff meeting with them and our planning commission members in early March, right at the very beginning of the pandemic. And because of the pandemic and the stay in place orders and other things going on, we just haven't really done much with it since. I know that the folks at Confluence have been busy working on reviewing our current comprehensive land use plan, as well as several master plans that were done probably about a decade or so ago. And they've also been doing some work with other communities, and they've come up with some pretty innovative tools that allow them to continue that work in a more virtual environment while still having that civic engagement that's so important as part of this process. So with all of that said, we thought it'd be good to revisit tonight. We have with us Chris Klein from Confluence and Chris Shires. They're going to kind of walk you through a little bit of a presentation that kind of summarizes that kickoff meeting that we had back in March. And then they're going to give you a demo of the tool they've been using with the other communities. And then we'll talk a little bit about the folks that we're proposing to appoint to a steering committee and really kind of launch this process later this summer. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chris. And I think we'll need to share the screen with him if we can do that.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I'm trying to share my screen, so as soon as that comes through.
Please try now.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Let me know if you can see the screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, thank you for the opportunity to provide a brief update to all of you. You know, Brian kind of gave you the history of our involvement to date, and we're excited to continue on with the process. We did have our kickoff meeting with a joint meeting of the Planning Commission and the City Council back in March, and I'll give you a quick update of some of the exercises that we went through during that meeting. We'll talk a little bit about the schedule and some of the next steps. And I really wanted to save the bulk of my portion of this presentation to talk about those interactive tools that we've been using and we're proposing to use here in Mission. We've had some good success with it. So the first exercise that we had as the visioning exercise, we had some postcards that we handed out during our kickoff meeting, and you know, asked for you know, you should visit me in Mission because, and there were lots of great answers. Just kind of some icebreaker exercises. This was one of the strangest meetings that we've had because everybody had to sit 6 feet apart. We walked in the room and it was all the chairs set all the way apart from each other. It was interesting. It was before we were all wearing masks, but we were glad to have gotten the chance to engage everyone in this process. One of the exercises we did, we asked, what are the biggest opportunities for Mission? And the responses here in a word cloud, the larger the word, the more times we heard it. the smaller the word, we may have only had 1 or 2 responses. Biggest was your location within the Kansas City metro area is just a great asset. There's an opportunity to enhance parks and redevelopment opportunities, but you want to balance that with maintaining that small town character, the affordable housing, and then keep that young and diverse population, engage the community. A lot of discussion about environmental policies and sustainability and walkability in downtown. Some of the biggest challenges for Mission, aging infrastructure was number 1, and then affordable housing and environmental sustainability. And then again, that balance between new development and the existing character, maybe not wanting to lose that small town atmosphere. Aging housing stock, community support, state government, applying form-based code, all of those things came into play with some of the challenges. What is your one big dream for Mission? I think I went backwards here. Fix all the infrastructure. So that was the biggest dream, and then maintain affordability, complete the Mission Gateway, maintain community values, become a destination community and a model for environmental policies, and then improve access to Metcalf made the list as well. And then one of the biggest fears for Mission, the responses were lack of financial resources, environmental challenges, not listening to residents, becomes too expensive, negative community reputation, don't want to lose that small town feel, worried about an economic downturn, opportunities for senior housing. Those are all some of the initial responses that we received from the Joint Committee, and it's always helpful to have that at the start of a process like this. Our planning process is really grounded in community engagement, and we're always looking for creative ways to engage people in helping to shape a vision for the future of their community, whether that's elected officials, appointed officials, city staff, key stakeholders or property owners, businesses, or residents. Everyone that lives and works in Mission, we want to get their perspective, and we want to try to provide as many opportunities as we can throughout this process for them to share their voices with us, for us to listen, and for us to shape the plan accordingly. With that, we know that you're going through a branding process right now with another consultant. So we'll have an opportunity to engage with them. We've already been shared some of the work product that's been developed thus far. And so as we develop tools to put online and to help craft a look and feel for what this report will look like and what the website will look like, we'll take some cues from some of the recommendations coming out of that study, just to make sure that we're coordinating those efforts. As Brian mentioned, we've been reviewing the existing plans throughout the city of Mission. There's been a variety of different plans for different parts of the city. We will be looking at population, housing, commercial analysis, and emerging trends. Leland Consultants is on our team. We've worked with them on a number of different projects throughout the Midwest. They're very familiar with Kansas City, and they've already started looking at some of the land use and demographic information. We'll be sharing some of that with the steering committee at our upcoming meeting with them. We do have a component of analyzing the existing transportation network. WSP is a consultant firm, engineers that are on our team. So we'll be looking at complete streets, opportunities to integrate bicycle and pedestrian facilities in conjunction with some of your streets to improve connectivity and take people's input into account on what their preferred methods are and do they want to increase walkability or bikeability within the community. And then analyzing technology infrastructure. All of these elements were in the city's RFP, so we wanted to be responsive. There was an analysis of available high-speed internet connectivity, so we're planning to look at that and in the entire city. There's some different coverages in different parts of the city, just to have a better sense of what that level of consistency is, or if there's some pockets that need some help. Task 6 is analyzing the existing land use classifications and zoning. So we'll be looking at the future land use maps, maybe some changes in land use, and then any other recommendations for how to more closely align design guidelines and those kinds of things with how everybody envisions the future of mission taking shape. And then drafting and up the final plans and the recommendations in the report and taking it through the city's process. So that's our high-level scope of services. We started on March 12th here on the schedule, and then COVID kicked in, and we've again been busy reviewing information and preparing for engaging a steering committee, and it sounds like that's on the agenda tonight as well, to look at that list of participants. And now that we'll be able to begin working with them, we're looking right now, we've just got a tentative date scheduled of August here, so that would give us about a month from now. Once the list has been approved, we can get notices out to them. We'll find a date that works for everybody and proceed with having those meetings. We wanted to try to begin to engage that group and the public sometime in September as well. And we'll have a number of interviews with key stakeholders that we've begun generating a list with city staff. We can have some one-on-one interviews with people to really get a sense for what it's like to either do business in Mission or live in Mission, what their individual perspectives are. Some folks that maybe have been here a long time and have seen some change over time, and those that are maybe fairly new to the area, and what drew them to either locate their business or move to Mission. So taking all of those perspectives into account will give us a more well-rounded view of people's experience and attraction to Mission. And then we're trying to work around some of the holidays. So our plan is to try to engage folks again in November, right before Thanksgiving holiday, to review a lot of the vision and input and direction. And then over the end of the year and the first part of 2021, we'll begin drafting up the plans and coming back to February and March to go through some of the final round of the process. There'll be plenty of opportunities for public input. Hopefully we'll be able to have some in-person public meetings by the time we're further along in this process. But leading up to that, we wanted to have an opportunity to engage folks in this process in a virtual way. We have found a lot of folks have really gravitated towards Zoom and Teams and online meetings of all sorts. And we're finding it as a great opportunity to engage people, even in a more robust way than we would have if we'd have just had a big open house event. So what you see on the screen now is an example of some of the work we're doing in Parkville. We're working on their master plan for their community. And we've developed an interactive website. We've done an exhaustive search for the right tool for us to utilize for this type of outreach. There's a whole host of different opportunities out there, but this social pinpoint is the name of this particular tool. We have used it successfully on a number of different projects and have found it to be very flexible and very easy for people to utilize. and it has some mapping exercises that allows folks probably the closest experience to being in an open house as possible. So imagine if we were in pre-COVID, hadn't gone through this experience, we would have had a comprehensive plan meeting, maybe 1 or 2 open house meetings where we had a series of boards up on the wall. We might give people dots to put on things that they like or don't like. We might have Post-its and let people write comments and stick them on the boards, and we'd probably have staff members positioned around the room to answer questions and give a little bit more information about any of the boards. But really, they'd probably have a 1 to 2 hour opportunity to engage in that room and provide their input. With this type of virtual opportunity, we can leave this up on the website for a month or 6 weeks, and use a variety of ways to get the word out to folks that the site is available, so they can come to it, they can start to provide some input, they can think about it and come back to it and provide some additional input. So it gives folks a lot more opportunity to kind of digest the information, think about it, and provide their input. So I'm going to try to share my screen because I've got the actual website pulled up, so I'm going to do that now. And let me know if you can see this screen here. Can you see this where I'm scrolling down? Okay, perfect. So this is our Parkville website. We came up with a quick logo for the plan. This site is live right now, and it is only for use by the steering committee for the city of Parkville. We have a public meeting scheduled for July 9th. So we're going to have the steering committee go through the same kind of exercises that we're going to do with the public, and we'll kind of compare the results of each. So it's kind of a welcome. We have the actual slides that we provided them during the meeting that we had with them last week, so they can come back and look through the slides. Everything is open and transparent, so they can remind themselves of the slideshow. We actually recorded the presentation. So we, just like you're recording this session, we recorded our interactive session with the steering committee, and then we've uploaded that video here. So if I were to play it, you'd see us. Yeah, so that was the mayor of Parkville welcoming everybody, and then we got on with the presentation. So there were a couple of members that weren't able to attend that night, so this is helpful for them. They can go in and watch the entire thing, be totally up to speed. Or anyone that wasn't able to or was able to participate and wants to go back and watch it, they can. And then we've got a series of engagement exercises. The most robust one is this mapping exercise. So we've got the entire map of Parkville in here. I'll show you how this works. We're proposing to do a similar thing for the city of Mission. So you get some exercise or an intro here about what we're trying to accomplish. There's several different comments, and we can customize these based on any community. For Parkville, they wanted to have a transportation comment, a stormwater comment, questions, an idea. Someone had an idea for a part of the city that they wanted us to take into account. They can use that, an area that needs work or an area that they love and they don't want it to change. And then another one that says, I want to walk or bike here. And so they go to the map. All of those items are up here on the top. And if I was one of the participants, I could grab, like, let's say I had an idea and I said, I want them to do something about I-435, the traffic's horrible, just making something up. I would drag that comment here, and then it would pop it up. I could type it in. I'd type in my name, my address, and my email. The reason we're asking for folks' address here is that when they're putting this, I want to walk or bike here, it tells us where they're coming from. So if it's someone from outside the community that's giving us input and they want to get to a park in Parkville, or if it's a certain neighborhood within Parkville, like for instance, if this neighborhood that's developing right here, there's a portion of it that's in Parkville. If all of these folks are wanting to get to the grocery store that's over here on their bike, well, we could look at that and see where the input's coming from different neighborhoods. So it's helpful to find the address of where these are coming from. And so this is live. This has only been up about 5 days or so, but you can see a range of the comments that people have made. Here's an idea. Someone said, consider pursuing annexation for small commercial parcels along 64th Street. And kind of like social media, you don't have to write the exact same thing. If you like this comment or you don't like this comment, you can just easily click on one of these. So you don't have to replicate it. Somebody said something that you wanted to say, you can quickly like it or dislike it, or you can write your own comment if you'd like. Let's see, some other things that they've said about, well, these big developments, wow. A blood-sucking scourge on the balance sheets. All right, so I didn't vet this one yet, and we're, but you do get some interesting comments on here, and we do need to do some polite editing from time to time. But really, we haven't had many comments that get out of hand or anything. But you can see where the range of comments are coming from and what areas they're focused on. There have been people that have put transportation comments on here about continued growth out west and needing to upgrade the roadways to handle that additional traffic. Some stormwater comments about where areas that they know are local flooding or issues that we want to address in the CIP. So it's a great way to get a lot of different types of feedback. And then folks that aren't familiar with all of the assets in town, we make up like Adams Park here. We take a picture of the park and explain what's available there. So they have a better sense of where all of those assets are located. The other thing that we've done here that we think would be a good opportunity in Mission is to get some feedback on some of the previous plans that have been done for the community. Because much like the Planning Commission, you're helping to implement a lot of these recommendations in several of these plans. There's probably some things that your Planning Commission has experienced that they want to make sure that we take into account and improve some of those plans, maybe some areas that aren't quite as clear as they could be. So we've provided a way of overlaying, like in this instance, the 2020 future land use plan. We brought in Parkville's future land use plan and overlaid it here on the map so people can go in and make comments on the future land use plan and tell us if they want certain areas to change. We've done the same thing with their annexation priorities and some of their downtown plans. There's like a downtown redevelopment plan that they put together. So we can take those and digitally superimpose them right on the map. They're all located in GIS. So anytime somebody makes a comment on this, we know exactly what parcel they're talking about. And then we're going to be in the process of sifting through all of these comments. And then we'll be sending out a questionnaire to the steering committee here to say, how was your experience using the site? What things could we do to make it even better? We'll be getting that input the end of this week and the first part of next week. And we'll be making some edits to their site so it can go live on July 9th. So it gives you a good sense of what that mapping tool is going to be like. We also have some exercises in here that similar to having a big visual board of pictures of different types of housing or different types of park improvements. For example, here's a visual preference exercise for parks. So folks can go in and look at these 14 different images and they get 6 votes. So they can pick their favorite up to 6 images that they feel like want to be, they think we should explore as a part of the parks facilities for the city of Parkville. So they can click on all of those and save them. And then we've got just a 10 question survey. It's pretty quick to fill out. Their guiding principles. We're in the process of revising some of their goals and their principles, and they can go on here and look at them and order them if in terms of priority. They could say, I think community character is most important, and I want environmental stewardship to be second, and civic and open spaces to be third. So you put them in whatever order you want and then submit it at the bottom. So we'll be able to sift through all of this information and take it all into account as we move forward with this planning process. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what we've done for Parkville and other communities. We're working with the city of Merriam right now as well. They've got a similar site up, and Chris Shires has done several of these up in the Iowa area as well. So with that, the other thing I was going to mention is that we know not everybody in the community from an equity standpoint has access to a computer or smartphone. These are all geared towards use of devices. It's easy for folks to do it on their phone as well, or a tablet. But for some of these, we're looking at partnerships with local libraries that are open, and saying if you want to access a computer to participate digitally, there would be some computers available at the library, and we'd have some information up at the library, and folks would know to help folks with that process. And for those that don't have access or the ability to get to the library, we can create some paper packets of all of these exercises and have those available either at the community center or at City Hall. So folks could go pick one up. They could fill it out themselves and then just submit it back where they picked it up. We'd have a reception box there or something that they could turn that in. We'll sift through all of that information and take it into account. So we feel like we've got a pretty good tool that has given us some great results so far, and we're excited to bring those forward for the City of Mission. And I think some of our next steps are just once we get the steering committee list finalized, we'd like to try to get that meeting with them scheduled as early in August as we can, so we can get the ball rolling and start to prepare the website and the tools to begin some of the community outreach. With that, I think we're available to answer questions or any comments that anybody has for the good of the cause. We're happy to do so, but thanks again for the opportunity to give you a brief update on what we've been up to, and we're excited to keep moving forward.
All right, any questions at this time for Chris? Go ahead and jump in.
I have one. Could someone explain cohesively how Confluence and Crux interact, how they parallel each other, how they complement each other, or how are they standalone? Can you explain to me how those two, what the parallel track is for those two entities?
Sure, I can try. Chris, do you want to stop sharing your screen? Maybe we can.
Oh, sure. Yep. There you go.
So, much of what we heard from Crux in the research phase of their work was based on outreach to the community with interviews, and we did the focus groups about the things you love about mission, the things you wish were more true about mission, those kinds of values statements, and the characteristics of the community that are both worth preserving and then some that we'd like to enhance. So that work has just been handed over. It came first because it came first, and not necessarily by intention. And that work is feeding into Confluence's work now. So in terms of going out and getting feedback, you don't have to start from that same position that Crux did with that bottom line. You've had a flavor kind of survey and a values survey to some degree, and now you can start applying that. And so, Chris's presentation really is focused on land use, and it's the space and the geography and the use and the character, that. So there's character here that I think Crux is really focused on, and then there's application of that and those values to what you see and feel and do and interact with in the community.
Okay, all right, thanks.
I think that's well put. I don't really see the two paralleling each other as much as they kind of cross each other. So Confluence is going to take the work that Crux has done and review that just like they reviewed all the other master plans and the work done to date, and use that as part of that body of work going forward and what they do.
Yeah, the last thing we want to do is duplicate efforts. So if they've already engaged on certain topics and gotten great input and feedback, we definitely will take that into account and make sure we're not duplicating efforts and asking the same question. We want to build on what has already been done.
Right.
So you mentioned website. So would they have interface with our city website, and so would you, or would you have a separate one, or how does that work?
We can utilize the city's website. We're open and flexible to working with the city. So for instance, the city of Parkville wanted the project website to just live within the city's site. So they created a new page within the city's platform. We provided some content to them to get the word out about the public meeting. And so they've got a page on their own site. And then once we make this interactive site, which we created, once we make this live on July 9th at the public meeting, that link will be provided on the city's website. So someone that goes to the city's site can click on it, and it'll take them right to our project interactive website, and they can do all of the exercises there. So we can work it however you'd like to, but this interactive website is a standalone thing that you can link to.
Okay.
Easily.
Ken, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. I don't know if this is for Brian or for whom. I wanted to talk a little bit about the steering committee composition. I know that you have 11 people that are identified for the steering committee. Is that a typical size for a steering committee? Number one.
Yes.
And then number two, I'm wondering whether we can have a little bit more diversity in terms of representation on the steering committee. I'm thinking about some minority representation. I don't know if we have minority representation on the steering committee, but I think that it would be good to perhaps add 2 people that would represent minority perspective.
I would add to that maybe age considerations as well. I'm not sure on here, but as we're talking about communities for all ages, do we think this accurately reflects those demographics as well?
I don't know everybody on the list, so I can't necessarily speak to age. I know obviously we have Councilmember Krings of a certain age, and we have Councilmember Flores of another age. So you probably see a little bit of diversity in that regard. I think probably most everybody on the list is Caucasian. I don't know if we have anybody that's a minority, but we can certainly seek out folks of a certain demographic. If you have anybody in mind, a suggestion, we're open to that.
Well, I was thinking about, like, first you're talking about small businesses represented. Jose Ramirez, who owns Moss Printing.
Yeah, that's,
You also You also have some minority restaurants like Thai Orchid that might represent minorities. You also have a minority that owns a Grand Liquor Store. So I'm just thinking if you want to think about some alternative people or even add 2 people that would bring in some minority perspective.
Yeah, we can look into that.
And I also did want to mention that, even if everyone doesn't get added to the committee, we definitely want to do some one-on-one interviews with lots of diverse groups. So some of those folks may be too busy to participate in a committee, but would be able to also participate in one-on-one interviews to help us. So we definitely want to reach out to everybody. So if there's others during this process that you feel would be helpful for us to engage with, that you think would be a good voice for us to hear, please send those to Brian or to me, and we'll put them on the list of folks that we want to reach out to.
Great. Any other questions?
Polly,
Yep.
hi, Council Member Thomas here. I just had a follow-up question to one of Debbie's questions about kind of the intersection between Crux and Confluence, and mine is more just a request from staff to sometime down the line or in the future maybe see that timeline that Confluence showed, and with a complementary timeline of Crux and where those meet, so we have this vision of what the rebranding rollout timeline is. And I know so much is up in the air with COVID, but when it's appropriate, when we get that idea, that's something I'd like to see, and maybe something, Debbie, you were alluding to.
I have actually prepared to share with you in department updates 306090 from Crux. So I haven't compared the two or put them together, but we have this the first pass of the next few stages of Crux work, so I can share that.
Great. Anything else? Other questions?
So
Or I would, yep, Ken?
I'm just wondering, so we want to go ahead and move this forward?
Yeah, that's gonna be my question. Do you all feel comfortable moving forward the list with the thought that we will reach out to some of those folks that you mentioned, or maybe some other people that you suggest offline? And we can certainly add those to the list for your consideration on the 15th.
Yes,
Would you rather we come back in August with a fresh list?
I would go ahead and move forward with this, and I think RC wants to say something.
Oh, I just said I'm good with moving forward as well, and we can review additional names or anything that are provided in the meantime.
Maybe we'll not do this as consent, but put this under committee reports.
Sounds good.
Yep. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you to our presenters.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have another action item, which is playground equipment repairs. Penn, Almoney.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thanks for having me today. Staff recently concluded a playground inspection of each of the playgrounds at Anderson Park, Broadmoor, Mohawk, as well as Waterworks Parks. And just for informational purposes, the most recent installation was 2001, and the longest tenured playground was installed in 1996. So generally speaking, our playgrounds have weathered the elements very well. We've replaced certain features over the years. Unfortunately, through the risk and safety assessment, there's noticeable deterioration on some of the decking as well as steps and hardware attaching each of these elements. So the American Society for Testing and Materials, as well as the Consumer Product Safety Commission, have established guidelines for proper playground maintenance. And those guidelines were implemented as part of this kind of prioritization of certain risk elements. So they break them down into hazards. For simplicity, we broke it down into high risk versus medium risk. And according to the ASTM, a priority 1 hazard, which for us is a high risk, would be a potential death associated with it. That's entanglement or entrapment of a head. And then priority 2 or medium risk elements are something like impalement or crushed shear, something that's got long-term injury associated with the element. So as we all know, safety is a very high priority. We value our children, we value our neighborhoods, and we value connecting our citizens in a safe and beautiful area. We also understand that revenue shortfalls are a consideration this time of year. So in preparation, we've planned, as part of our capital improvement projects, a replacement of each of these playground amenities over the course of several years. And we've set aside $100,000 each year for that to happen. Because of COVID-19 and the associated impacts to revenues, we've kind of tabled all of those capital improvement projects for the time being. So in light of the budget circumstances, we took the issues to the Park, Recreation, and Tree Commission and discussed kind of the implications of playground elements being unsafe, as well as budgetary constraints. And the recommendation from them and staff is that we immediately replace all of the at-risk elements and come into compliance with each of our playgrounds. So in the case of council not feeling comfortable authorizing funding for all of those improvements, the PRT Commission has broken down each of these parks one by one in terms of what's the highest risk, what they prioritize being immediately replaceable, and then listing that 1, 2, 3, and 4. So Anderson Park is a recommendation because it's got some entanglement and impalement elements. If we continue down the list, Waterworks would be their next recommendation, followed by Mohawk Park, and then Broadmoor. So the anticipated timeline is about 4 weeks. Miracle Custom Play Structures is a sole source vendor. They installed each one of these playgrounds. And because we don't have the expertise to install within the City of Mission staff, we would lean on them and their rigorous training program, as well as their bonded installer, to do that for us. So our recommendation is that we contract with Miracle Custom Play Systems for playground part replacement and repair not to exceed $37,629, and then contract with American Midwest Contractors, who's their bonded installer, for an amount not to exceed $16,935.45. Now, I did have a follow-up question regarding the impacts that this may have at Mohawk Park specifically, since we're currently in the process of discussing a Mohawk Park master plan redesign. And the idea behind that, although we're still in discussions with Confluence, SFS Architects, and have yet to discuss this with the Mohawk Park Steering Committee, the idea is that because there's so many elements that would need replaced and built on site, that the entire project would have been broken down into phases. This playground structure probably would have been pushed back to a phase 2 or a phase 3, which according to our estimates would be 2-3 years out. And so any of these risk elements would not have been immediately fixed. Are there any additional questions?
Sally?
Yes, Ken? And then Hillary?
I think that this is a good idea to move forward. I think that, safety, public safety is important, and these hazards should really be corrected right away. So I'm very much in support of this and would recommend that this go to consent agenda.
Hillary, did you have a question or comment?
Just a comment echoing Councilmember Davis's comments. I think this is very important for us to move ahead with, and happy to see this come out of PRT and all the work you've been doing, Penn. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. Any other questions or comments, or we go with taking this to consent?
Consent.
Consent. All right. Thank you, Penn.
You're welcome.
And looks like we've got you again for our next item, which is the drone ordinance.
Okay. So just as a review, our drone ordinance was a discussion item in a previous CDC meeting, and it was proposed by the Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission as part of the Mohawk Park Master Plan design discussion. So the idea behind that was, once we start investing in Mohawk Park, obviously our citizens are going to come out. We'll probably get some exuberant hobbyists who are going to bring in their newly found unmanned aircraft systems and test it out in newly redesigned park. And there were concerns surrounding that. That discussion then pivoted to, okay, what have our neighbors in other communities done? And what does that ordinance look like? And who are good users who don't necessarily need policing? So just as a point of clarification, hobbyists and people that generally don't have accountability built into their use, because we don't know who they are, we don't know their intentions in flying, versus say real estate agents or city personnel or any kind of emergency staff who utilize drone in the daily performance of their activities. That accountability is built in, and we can always follow up with him by namesake. And so the idea was to say, how do we marry the two ideas? How do we create something that holds people accountable, but then allows others their use when it's necessary? And so staff partnered with police, drafted an ordinance, and submitted that to Payne and Jones for their review. And we've crafted the ordinance that's before you. So some of the highlights of that ordinance are privacy elements, event use permissions, reckless and careless use, property delineation between private and public, impeding and obstructing public safety operations or the personnel involved in those elements. And then staff discussed severability as well as the penalty. So typically, the penalty side, a fine ranges between $100 and $150, including a mandatory $40 court cost. And the judge has the flexibility to determine the fine within a range that's outlined in the ordinance. Staff spoke with Judge Drill about whether the general provisions were appropriate to use for various offenses. He supported the unclassified violation range due to the variation and severity of the misuse within each section, and recommended that the amount not be added to the fine schedule. I did have a question from Councilmember Flora regarding the general penalty and seeming excessive. So followed up with Captain Dan Madden to get examples of what that might entail and why that might not be a concern in keeping in the ordinance. So as it's currently crafted, the punishment section is within the general penalty of 100.100 for a couple reasons. One of the primary reasons is the range of issues that could fall within the perpetrators. So example, simply flying a drone safely but in violation of an ordinance is a lot less severe than someone flying a drone that could potentially harm someone or put them in danger or maybe damage infrastructure. And the secondary element would be more progressive punishment for those that are repeat offenders. This general ordinance allows the judge to impose fines and/or jail sentences that are increasingly more severe if someone continued to violate the ordinance. So an example of this would be window peeping, which is 215.020. There's no punishment classified in that section, so it automatically reverts back to the provisions in 100.100. And aside from an operator harming someone with an unmanned aircraft system, the operator using a drone to invade someone's privacy would be one of the more serious violations. And then the penalty associated with that violation for window peeping, for example, would be the same under those circumstances. So it kind of aligns with that element. Another example would be Article 6, offenses against the public peace, which is where staff is proposing this ordinance be laden, are all punishable under the general penalty of 100.100. And one of those offenses is disturbing the peace. So similar to window peeping, disturbing the peace as the provisions in the ordinance that seem to align well with the current structure and similar violations. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Penn. I think that helps. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, sorry. Are there any questions?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, I think that addresses some of my concern. It sounds like with other similar offenses, we have this range, then we leave it to the judge's discretion to sort of determine based on the particulars what would be appropriate, with the understanding of the more minor offenses aren't going to result in 6 months in jail or a $1,000 fine.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Great point of clarification. I appreciated the question and the opportunity to find specific examples.
I did also have a question about why real estate services were singled out for exemption in terms of they're the only, private actors other than the media, which I assume there's First Amendment concerns there. So I wondered about the real estate carve out.
Yeah, the general idea behind them being carved out was because the accountability is built into their brand is on a car. You typically walk around with a logoed shirt, and they're in open space actively patrolling for a specific purpose. So if there were any questions in terms of conduct, you could reference that vehicle or that company pretty easily.
Okay.
And in the case of them not being identifiable, then they would fall under just a general hobbyist use, which you could call in and just have the police discuss with.
Sally?
Yep. Go ahead, Ken.
I would recommend that we take this to council as a non-consent item.
Okay. Any other questions or about that recommendation or questions for Penn? All right. Thank you, Penn.
You're welcome.
Next up, we have an amendment to special purpose permit granted to Sandhills Brewing for use of a public sidewalk for outdoor dining. Brian Scott and Kaitlyn Service.
You muted?
Yeah, I unmuted myself. Thank you. My computer was also dying. That's why I was fumbling around underneath my desk trying to get a cord attached in there too. So I apologize for that earlier. I just saw this message flash up saying battery low. But I think I solved that problem. So this is a rerun. This item was on your agenda last month. Sandhills Brewing had requested application to use a portion of the sidewalk in front of their location of 5612 Johnson Drive. And no sooner had we all approved that and we're ready to sign the resolution, they called us and said they're signing a new lease, kind of extending their space into 5610 Johnson Drive. It's next door. It's the old artist studio that Betty Benson had for years and years. So we asked them to kind of resubmit a new application, and we wanted to run that past you all. I'll let Kaitlyn kind of speak to the application and the expansion they want to do kind of in front of that new lease space. And then I'll come back and talk a little bit about the ordinance. That looks a little different than what was approved to you last time. So I'll explain that once Kaitlyn gives her presentation.
Sure, yeah. I'll keep this really brief because it really is pretty identical to what was approved in June. It's just an additional 13 feet of storefront, continuation of that previous concept. So it continues the aesthetic that was established. It continues the ADA, accessibility and design. Sandhills expects to take possession of the space no later than August 1st. So they're excited to get going on it. I'm happy to go through the criteria that was used to establish the initial patio, if anyone would like a refresher on that.
Yeah, if you want to share the screen with me, I actually have it pulled up right now. The
Brent, if you
application
can just,
itself.
oh, if you want to just go hover below and hit share screen, I think it would work for you.
Okay.
And then you have to hit the,
There I am.
So this just extends it to the east, is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
There we go. So let's see. This is kind of on the west side, and kind of travel east on the sidewalk here. There's that wall right next to the parking with some of the flowering right here, the shrubbery. And then this is their current door right there. So they're wanting to go a little bit more to the east. I'll have to pull that back down again. So again, this is the door to their current location of 5612 Johnson Drive. And they want to move into this location of 5612 and occupy that as well, in addition to. And so this is kind of the extension they're looking to do, about 13 feet east of that front door, about 7 feet out to the sidewalk.
Well, Sally?
Yes, Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is a very good idea. I'm glad to see that they're expanding to the next door, and that gives them a little bit more space to have their services. And I would go ahead and recommend non-consent on this one.
Non-consent?
I'm sorry, consent.
Consent? Okay.
I would agree with that. I mean, just to make sure everything is up to par with ADA requirements and, you know, enough space to pass through that whole area, right?
Right, exactly. Yep. Same standards still
Brian?
apply.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, then I
Brian,
would
I had
agree.
a couple questions. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Nick.
I was just gonna say I would agree with Councilmember Davis. I think that's great.
Yeah, Brian, I just had a couple questions on the ordinance language.
Uh-huh.
So section 3 still reads adjacent to the storefront addressed as 5612 Johnson Drive, and it doesn't mention 5610.
Yeah, we need to add that in there. That's a correction. Thank you for
Okay.
pointing that out.
And then I wondered on section 4A on the size, I saw Sandhills' note was that it was 375 square feet approximately, and the ordinance says no greater than 300. So I wondered if that also needed to be adjusted for the expansion area.
Yeah, we'll look at that again. I measured it and I didn't come up with 375 feet. So I'll
Okay.
confirm with Kaitlyn and them, and we'll make the adjustment if necessary.
Okay. And then my last question was, I think this is really great as well. And thank you to Kaitlyn for putting in all the work on this sort of sidewalk guidelines resource. And so I was just wondering when we're anticipating the final version of that to be ready to, you know, share out with our other businesses who might be interested in this concept.
That is a very good question. I need to share that internally with the rest of our staff and kind of get their input on that. But I think we could probably, it's July, I think we could probably get it out by September.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
We can certainly share that with you in a future meeting if you'd like to see that.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Just to kind of give you, since Sandhills wanted to take a second bite of the apple, if you will, I wanted to do the same. And in looking at what we presented to you last time, the resolution, I had some second thoughts about that, frankly, and I thought it'd be better to turn the resolution into an ordinance. The ordinance has a little bit more teeth to it than a resolution does. And then the other thing I did was I actually limited the term of the special purpose permit to 5 years. And so that gives us a chance to kind of evaluate that. And if we want to make some tweaks, we can revisit with them when they make an application to renew that. And at that time, we feel comfortable with it and they feel comfortable with it, we can certainly extend it for a longer period of time. And I've discussed this with both Joe and Jonathan at Sandhills, and they're agreeable to that. So
Okay.
this is kind of a new version of the same you saw last time. It's a little different format.
Great. Unless we have any other questions, we'll take that to consent then. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our action items for tonight. We do also have one discussion item, that is the Summit Condominiums private street acceptance request. Celia and Laura.
Yes, thank you. And I'll go ahead and start that item and then let Celia kick in. But included in your packet was a letter from the HOA of the Summit Condominiums, which are located just off of Lamar, to the north of 51st Street. A request to the city to consider taking over the streets in that subdivision, which are currently private and have been private since it was constructed, and accepting those as public streets. We had a conversation with Carol Nelson and Veronica, and I'm sorry, I can't remember Veronica's last name, but it works with their management company, HOA management company, back in May to talk about this request. This is not the first time, at least in my tenure with the city, that we've had a similar request come forward from Summit Condominiums, but what we asked them to do was to put their request formally in writing, and that we would bring that forward to the city council as a discussion item. So I will wanted to provide just a little bit of context in terms of other situations or areas in town where we have private streets or where we've kind of addressed this situation in the past. And then I can turn it over to Celia to talk a little bit more about the technical considerations and aspects. But so several years ago, we have, and it's not atypical in a townhome or condominium type development, that when those are constructed, the streets are constructed by the developer, and that those streets remain private. Oftentimes they are not through streets, so they don't connect. They are intended just to serve the residents of that development. And so those streets are very often private streets. And so at the time that a development like that is constructed, there is the opportunity to dedicate those streets as public streets and to turn those over to the city, and then that declaration gets recorded with the county, and they become part of our public street network. In the case of Summit Condominiums, those streets were private, and that dedication as public streets, that turnover as public streets, is not something that has occurred over time since their construction. Some of the other locations throughout Mission where we've had private streets, or where we've had private streets that we determined were intended, and we can find the documentation that were intended to be turned over to the city as public streets. In those instances, it includes Apollo Gardens, the 4900 West townhome or condominium development. And then most recently, the council may recall the situation with the Lincolnshire townhomes. And we unearthed some documentation that indicated that those streets were intended to have been dedicated as public streets from the get-go. And so we took those streets over last year and advised the Lincolnshire residents that those streets would then be factored in and become part of our regular considerations with the rest of the residential street network in terms of maintenance and repairs and replacement. The other area in town where we have private streets is Kennett Place, the Kennett Place subdivision, which is south of Shawnee Mission Parkway, right off of Lamar. It is a gated community, and the Kennett Place residents approached us probably about 2.5 years ago now, asking for some assistance in repair and maintenance of their streets. And they had a letter from former Mayor Powell from the early 90s, which had committed the city to maintenance of that private street network. And so we went through a process of evaluation of cost and conversations with them about whether or not they wanted to eventually turn those streets over for the streets to become public, or what level of maintenance the city was actually committed to. And ultimately, we ended up making a contribution to some street repairs that they then funded the balance of through their HOA dues. And through that process, we've formulated an agreement with the Kennett Place subdivision that very clearly specified what type of maintenance the city would and would not participate in on a go-forward basis. In the case of Kennett Place, they have no interest in their streets becoming public. So that was a little bit of a different situation. So again, really 3 different types of scenarios that have surfaced as it relates to public and private streets in Mission over the last 10 or 15 years. So the Summit Condominiums would be the last of the existing private streets. And again, we asked the HOA to make that formal request for consideration of accepting those to the council so that we would have an opportunity to kind of look at and evaluate that and think about how you wanted to respond to that. So with that, I will turn it over to Celia to share a little bit about kind of the technical analysis that we did on the condition of the streets, and I can follow up with some other options.
Laura, could I ask one clarifying question real quick?
Yes.
So just, I know you were walking through what some of the other cases look like. Just to clarify here, there's no documentation with respect to this development of either an intent to assume or an intent to assist with repairs, right?
That is correct.
That you found? Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Based on Summit Condominiums HOA request, we hired Olson Associates, who is our on-call engineer, to go out and take a look at the pavement to figure out what the condition was and what a cost would be to maintain if we were to take over these streets as public. They observed a lot of alligator cracking, which is an indication of deteriorated pavement. And they took 3 soil borings, 2 of which had only 2.4 inches of asphalt and 1 had 6 inches of asphalt. And as you know about other cities, other streets in Mission, when we have that thin layer of asphalt, we're unable to mill and overlay it. And besides, a 2-inch will deteriorate and require more maintenance over time, just because that doesn't carry the load of vehicle traffic. I mean, there's not a lot of traffic on there, but 2 inches over time, you just see that deterioration and more patching and pothole. So Olson estimated a cost for full depth reconstruction, and that cost was approximately $470,000. And that's in today's dollars. So depending on when we did it, we may need to do some patching and potholes along the way before we would do the full depth reconstruction. And we would ask, if we were to take over these streets as public, that the HOA would still maintain responsibility of the parking area and the curb around the parking area, as well as the private street lights in the median. And then we would also request, they would need to give us a right-of-way easement for the streets. So I added a couple items to consider, and you already know most of these items, or City Administrator Smith has listed those, but in general, public streets are considered public when they're connected to other public streets and they benefit the entire city. In this case, the street network is primarily for the condominiums, and because there's one way in and out, you don't typically go there unless you're going to the condominiums. And as you know, we have numerous public streets that are in immediate need of maintenance, and currently evaluating funding whether to address those, but a lot more needs than funding at this time. And then if we were to take on the private streets, we would have to prioritize this with our existing needs. There may be anticipation from the HOA that we would do the work, so there could be some, continued requests, but this would be prioritized in with our other projects, so we may not get to that full depth reconstruction for a while. And then just as Laura had mentioned, these are the only private streets left, except for Kenneth Place. And I thought that those were public too. So anyway, those are the items to consider while you discuss whether to consider taking over maintenance and making these public streets. Thank you.
All right. Any comments or questions for Laura or Celia?
Dolly.
Yeah, Trent, and then Ken.
Thank you for that presentation, both Laura and Celia. And I also understand that we have a couple members of the HOA on the call too. So I just want to make sure that if they feel like they need to add any comments, they jump in. I would like to ultimately help out this community. I'm a little worried about, considering the heels of our recent budget discussion and the decline in revenue as a result of COVID-19. I almost feel like I would be asking the city more for a list of available options that we could do in particular for this community. Maybe there's some sort of hybrid approach or compromise approach we can come to with the HOA to figure out how we can ultimately bring them under city control. I would like to see eventually all the streets in the city under the city control, but I want to make sure that it's fair to the rest of the residential streets that have been waiting their turn, and also in a way that's not adversarial to our budget. So with that being said, also if any of the folks on the call want to add their comments too, but that's kind of my take from this perspective.
Yeah, I would just remind any members of the public, if you can use the chat feature, if you would like to be called on to speak, to please put it in the chat, or if you have a comment that you would like in the chat, make in the chat, then we can read that out for you. I believe Councilmember Davis, you also had a question or comment?
Yes, I was asking more in terms of principle, looking forward. I mean, we know that this is past, and we know that these are situations, it's the last situation that that exists as a private road. The question I have is for future development, what are the principles that we look at in future development as it relates to this?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think the opportunity for that is probably fairly limited because I don't envision many areas in our community where you would be doing a larger scale development where you would have a developer coming in and putting in new streets, for example. So in many instances when that occurs, you have the developer build to your specific street standards at the time that the initial development is constructed. And then if those streets are to become public streets at the time that they're dedicated, they've been built to your existing street standards. I think one of the challenges that we have is that, as we've been discussing, we don't have specific street standards in our community, and we have not had those over time. And so, I think it's fair to assume that the streets in this subdivision were not built to a particular standard. So if we were to go through that process of developing those standards and we found ourselves in a position in the future of having a development that was going to be constructed, that would be one way to know or guarantee at the time that you accepted the streets as public, their condition and the standards to which they had been built. So you could make much more specific assumptions about the timeline for intermediate maintenance and or full depth reconstruction. So you could build those into your residential street program on an ongoing basis. You know, I think there are some hybrid options that we could explore. Oftentimes in other communities, when these requests come forward, the city may ask that the street be brought up to a current standard before it is dedicated and before the city would consider taking that on. I think if you look at the assessment, and that's why we wanted to go ahead and work with Olson to sort of get what that ballpark figure is. I think the cost associated with that aligns with the concerns that the HOA is expressing as they bring this request forward, and that is a lack of available funding to proceed with those kinds of repairs. Certainly, there are, you know, whether it be a special benefit district, if the street were to be made public, or we've used the community improvement district on private property with the Roland Court Townhomes Association, there are some ways that projects can be constructed and improved where that cost sharing occurs over a much longer time horizon for the residents. So I think there are some things there that we can explore. I think, you know, we took some similar core samples in the Kennett Place subdivision because we had concerns about their ability to proceed with some overlay treatments. They were actually able to secure a contractor at a lesser cost than what we had estimated to do that. So there may be some opportunities to just sort of explore that as well.
Yeah.
With the HOA.
Thank you, Laura. I had one comment, and I think Hillary has a question as well. I like the idea of having staff explore some other options like special assessments that would allow for assistance over time for the HOA to bring this up to condition rather than the city taking on another $470,000 project. But one thing, while the staff's looking into that, I would recommend that we hold this for any further council discussion until we get those comprehensive Stantec results regarding street conditions, and we see just how many full depth reconstruction projects we're looking at, and potentially have conversations at that time and further conversations with the condo association about whether, you know, for example, they'd be comfortable being put on the bottom of that list, or if they're expecting, you know, immediate action, and sort of aligning on expectations on that point. Hillary?
Well, I was just going to ask if Celia had an update on Stantec, because also I was interested in, you know, seeing what the timeline is, and, you know, making this decision without that information would be challenging.
So,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Celia.
Sorry. I was hoping to be able to bring something to you at the August Community Development Committee meeting, and what that would include is our proposed street treatments, the PCI, so what we recommend for each type of streets, a general cost, you know, it'll be based on unit rates. So we would bring that, so we would see a total cost to bring streets up to a certain standard. So for an arterial, you'd want the PCI of 70. So you do see that immediate cost today. One thing that we need to take a look at is stormwater, because those costs don't include stormwater. So probably I wanted to talk to you about that, and probably calculating, you know, some costs. But do we only repair the failed streets? Anytime we do a full depth, we put in new stormwater? You know, those kind of issues. And just so we have an idea of what we can do for these streets and what is the total cost. So some discussion items about that, and making sure you're comfortable with the assumptions. And then our next step would be to incorporate any of that in, take a look at some different budget options. If we had X amount to spend, you know, our overall PCI for the network would be this over a 10-year period, those kind of things. And then also maybe a preliminary list of, you know, how do we want to do that? Would we want, if we only have so much money, do we want to do a street in every ward? Do we want to do the worst first? You know, so there's a lot of different options to look at there. And I'm giving assumptions on ideally what, you know, I would recommend, but you may take a look at it and say, well, we really can't afford that. So maybe we do a lesser option. For example, for the full depth reconstruction for residential, I would recommend bringing it up to 8 inches. However, you know, we'll take a look at that total cost, and that may be too much. And since the streets generally, you know, they're pretty much a grid, so they're not a lot of through streets. There's not as much traffic. So maybe we decide, okay, with that money, we're going to go with 6 inches. So we'll talk about all that and, you know, be able to incorporate any recommendations you have and then bring it back a second time with that information.
Thanks, Celia. I have one comment I'm going to read from the chat, and then I think Nick had a question or comment. So we have Lance Irby in the chat who said, thanks, Trent, for your comments. Complete agreement. Summit Condos HOA is very interested in working towards a hybrid plan to make it happen and to be connected with the rest of the public streets and mission. Thanks all. Nick, did you still have a question?
Yeah, I actually
And then RC after Nick.
If we were to look to make those streets public, how would the parking situation work? And is there any other precedent for having, you know, public streets that only have dedicated parking for the private residences on those streets? I mean, just, you know, in front of my house, I can't block off the portion of the public street and only park my car there. And I'm just wondering if that would potentially lead to any concerns, or who would have to enforce that in those cases. Because I'm assuming right now it's private and they probably have a tow company that they contract with, but I'm wondering if that would turn into potential police situations there where we'd have to enforce that, or how that would play out.
Well, as public streets, we would have to enforce, not that there would be any speeding, because I think it would be hard to speed in that area, but, you know, we would have to enforce any of those kind of, you know, accidents. I mean, and the chief can talk more about that, but any kind of those concerned would be the city responsibility now.
So the same kind of parking rules be in place? Like if somebody left the car there for up to 2 days, it could just sit there until the time has passed where we can take action on it?
So I'm assuming that the parking, there would be no parking allowed on the public street because it's not wide enough. And so they would have to park in the private locations, and we would have to go through enforcement if somebody parked on the street because there's not enough room.
Well, I guess that's what I'm wondering. Those private, quote unquote, like the whole thing is private right now, but if the streets were made public, how do you make sure that how do you differentiate, I guess, the parking spaces and not have an issue with parking on the street?
I think we would have, I can't remember what the width of the streets are, but they're pretty narrow. So we wouldn't be able to allow the parking on the street. I mean, it would block it if you did. So, I mean, I think that's something we need to probably discuss more. Laura, do you have any thoughts?
No, I think that the thought was similar to what would occur in Lincolnshire, is that we would carve out so that the parking lots and the parking areas, including those that are under the carports, would remain the property of the HOA.
Right.
And so I suspect those would be signed in some fashion as private parking only, or resident, you know, owner parking only. And then they would still be responsible for having to enforce on that portion of the private property. But we would, the streets are just absolutely too narrow to allow for the on-street parking.
Yeah, it looks like Carol Nelson had made a comment in the chat. I think she's also affiliated with the HOA, that we have carports that we would maintain at a reduced cost. I'm not sure what that is referencing, but as discussed, we would also take care of the snow removal.
Right, so on the map in the Olson's memo shows the areas we would recommend if we were to take them over as public, and the remainder, which would be the parking spaces and the curb around there, would still remain private.
Sally?
RC, I think, had a question first, and then Ken. RC, did you still have a question?
Oh, sorry, I was talking on mute. Wondering if there had been any discussion or if the HOA had any consideration in reducing the HOA fees if the city were to take over the street maintenance. I was just curious because I know that some of the items that we would be taking over were mentioned in the reasoning behind some of those fees. So
Yeah, I don't know if anyone from the HOA could speak to the balance. I was under the impression that they don't have money for these repairs and so haven't been accounting for the cost of the street maintenance and their fees, but Celia or someone from the HOA might have a better sense of that.
I think if there's an HOA representative, they could probably talk about the fees and whether any maintenance costs are included in there.
maybe if they would even consider it, I guess.
And I think that's certainly something that, as we explore options going forward, that's probably a better conversation to have with the HOA and have a better understanding of, you know, I'm assuming they have a budget each year that gets presented and adopted. So certainly look at an evaluation of that as part of our ongoing kind of review of alternatives.
Yeah.
And then Ken, did you have a question? And then maybe Trent?
Yes, I actually, I would like to support Sally. I'm very cognizant of our time too tonight. We have a very large agenda on our next committee meeting. And since this is not an action item, I would like to suggest that we suspend the discussion after Trent has his comment, and then let's move to the next committee meeting.
Thanks. I was just going to say that
Trent.
for the interest of transparency, I live at this complex. So just for the public's understanding too.
All right, our people, I know I had made a suggestion, and Trent had made a suggestion to sort of look at the other possible financing options or the possibility that this could be brought up to condition before we'd assume it. And then I would also like to hold further discussion on this until we see those Stantec results. Is there general consensus around both of those? I see some heads nodding.
That's great.
Sully, I'm good with that.
All right, so that sounds like a plan. Is that clear enough for staff?
Yes.
All right, perfect. That concludes our discussion items. Thank you to the HOA members attending. I'm sure we'll see you again. Last item on our agenda, or sorry, we do have one more comment, an FYI from Lance Irby in the chat that the HOA has repaired some of the curbs, etc. So some work has been done. Our last item is department updates from Laura.
Sorry, I turned off my video. I'm clicking the wrong buttons tonight. I don't have anything, but I believe Celia has a couple of updates to share with you, and then we'll be ready to move on to finance and administration.
Okay, just
Great.
a quick update on the Lamar project. Superior Bowen, our contractor, finished the paving last week, and we're pretty much completed with the project, except there's some adjustment of some manholes that are in the street, and we've seeded all disturbed areas behind the sidewalk, but we're going to see how they take this year. And I mean, it's too hot to lay down sod right now, but they will come back in the spring and put down sod or replace it if it doesn't take. So I wanted to brag again about Superior Bowen, how they completed this job. They threw a lot of personnel at it, and they're done 30 days earlier. And also just a congratulations and thanks for Brent for really working hard on this project. And he really participated and helped make it successful. So the next step would be the bike lanes and the pavement markings, and working with KDOT to see if the contractor can get those done right away. They're trying to schedule a pre-construction conference right now. And originally we thought the project wouldn't be done till the end of July. So that's what we told them. So hopefully we can move that up and get that taken care of. Rock Creek, if you've driven by, you see a lot of trees have been removed. And I know it looks really barren, but those trees need to be removed so we can build the wall and make it more stable. So they've done a lot of tree clearing, they've done erosion control, they're bringing in some fill dirt, and if you want to see some very large blocks, drive by, and in the MD management property, they're starting to bring those huge blocks in, and we're hoping to have them start installing those in the next couple weeks. They've kind of changed the location. They're going to start on the HOA side because they'd like to get that done so we can get the parking lot paved this year. And we're still waiting on Wendy's, but I think we're pretty close to resolution. So they'll either jump onto Wendy's or just keep moving west. And then finally, the Johnson Drive reconfiguration. As we talked in a couple meetings ago, the traffic counts and the PED counts and the evaluation were scheduled for the spring, and then locale dropped a lane, and then when we got ready to do the counts, COVID happened and there's a lot of reduced traffic. I know that council has expressed concern about let's move forward on this project. So we plan to bring some options to you in August to discuss. Some of those may be, well, we could wait until traffic comes back up, but then that we don't know when that's going to be. So another option is moving forward with collecting the data and then providing a factor to estimate and accommodate, what the reduced traffic is and what it would be if we were in, normal times, I'll say. So that's kind of an estimate, but that's an option. Or we could start moving forward with public meetings and obtain some input. So we may have other options, but those are some of the options we'll talk about in August.
Yeah, I had one quick question on that. Didn't we just do a traffic study within the last, I think, about 2 years to get some of those traffic counts and everything along Johnson Drive? And I know that the one new project is going in, but I think we could probably look at similar situations and maybe just try to come up with some estimates on how that might impact it. We have traffic data that's not too old from what I can recall.
So we have a volume traffic count from 2018, but what we wanted to look at is traffic counts at the intersections and looking at the movements, because that will tell us what the delay would be on the side streets. And when they do those, they have automatic equipment that would also look at the pedestrian counts too, and look and see how many are using that location, and do we need to have other additional accommodations for them. So yes, we do have one count, but it would be more helpful to have counts at every intersection so we could see the volume on the side streets and what's going through that intersection.
All right, any other questions for Celia?
I think the short answer is going to be bring your sleeping bags to our August meeting. We've got lots to cover. Lots to cover.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. That concludes our staff updates. All right, then with that will conclude our CDC meeting.
And I'm going to take a 2-minute reprieve. So if you need to go get a glass of water or something, we won't use a whole 5 minutes, but 2 minutes. Come back and we'll start our finance meeting. Okay, I think we're back. Are we all back? I'll give it about 30 more seconds and then we'll move.
Running a tight ship over there.
That's right. My pets eat at 8 o'clock and they're going to be starving. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and start. This will begin the Finance and Administration Committee meeting. We are meeting remotely due to the pandemic. This is Wednesday, July 1st. It's supposed to be 7:30, but it's about 8:20. We'll move forward. We have a presentation tonight, 4 action items, and a discussion topic. If members of the public have any comments or questions, please use our chat feature, and we will respond accordingly as we see those comments come up. We have no public hearings tonight, so let's move directly into our public presentations. The first one, we have a presentation from our Mainstream Coalition representative, Michael Popa, on voter-to-voter initiative. Michael?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Mayor, Chair, Council members, thanks for having me here tonight. Thank you, staff. Let's see, so I've spoken with Councilmember Boltinghouse and Flora about this presentation I'm about to give tonight, and Mayor's also taken a look at it. I'm the Executive Director, let me introduce myself, Michael Popa, Executive Director of the Voter Network, which is the Mainstream Coalition's 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit affiliate. And we are launching a new project called City to City, which is in effect a city challenge with 4 cities in Northeast Johnson County that are interested right now. And that would be Roland Park, Mission, Prairie Village, and Westwood. And so with that, I don't want to take up a lot of your time. I know you have a huge agenda this evening, so I'm just going to jump right into the presentation. Emily, am I able to share my screen?
I believe so. I hope so.
Okay. Yes, I can. Excellent. Thank you. All right. Can everyone see that? Perfect. So like I mentioned, Voter to Voter Foundation is the 501c3 arm of Mainstream Coalition. We are nonprofit and nonpartisan. And we exist to inform, engage, and connect Kansans through nonpartisan voter education and effective voter turnouts. And we accomplish this using a suite of innovative online tools that are proven to increase civic engagement. We have Voter to Voter, which we'll be talking about in just a minute, and what City to City is based on. ksrepresent.org, which is coming soon, and that'll be a year-round representative lookup. It'll go from federal down to local levels. And then ksballot.org, which is live about 6 weeks prior to each election. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but you can put in your address, find out who and what is on your ballot. So what's the problem? Why are we doing this? As you probably already know, nearly 50% of registered Kansans don't vote. And common campaign tactics like targeted mail, social media, yard signs, they all work, right? But they don't work on people who aren't already voting. They don't move non-voters. They don't move low propensity voters. From 2008 to 2016, we saw a 77% decrease nationally in door contacts and over a 90% decrease in phone contacts. Now, due to COVID-19, we're seeing a little bit more phone contacts, but not enough to make a significant difference. And due to COVID-19 as well, you know, door knocking, in-person contact is getting much harder to execute. We want governing bodies to represent the communities that they serve. This way, all people are able to participate in making the decisions that impact them. Non-voters, as it says here, are more likely to have poor health outcomes. Studies show that cities in Kansas that encourage civic engagement experience more positive societal outcomes. And community members who vote are more likely to volunteer, stay informed, interact with their neighbors and elected officials, and then take active and informed roles in shaping the future of their community. Best of all of this can be accomplished at a distance, which is especially important right now. So voter to voter. It is nonpartisan, it's innovative, it's effective, and we like to say that it's peer pressure with a purpose. So the ask is simple, but it's highly effective. We ask volunteer team leaders and ambassadors to connect with people in their circles of influence. So 10 friends, family, neighbors, coworkers, and encourage them to vote. Studies have found that this is much more effective than hearing from strangers, and our results back that up, which I'll talk about just a second. On these teams, as I mentioned, they could be anything. We aim for 10 plus volunteers, and then we call those volunteers, as I said before, ambassadors, and the ambassadors are then choosing the friends that they're going to encourage to vote. 43% registered Kansans have voted in one or fewer of the past elections. We built voters online tool to help form teams, as I mentioned, to identify these voters in particular, and among the people they know with public data, real-time results, and concrete tasks. We have what we call a propensity score that we developed, and it's based on the last 4 elections of a certain kind. As you can see here, we have the November 2019 city school board, 2018 midterm, 2018 midterm primary, and then the 2016 presidential election. In 2018, we'll talk about the turnout, and these are all of the voters that were affiliated or that were a part of the voter to voter project. In the primary, in all of Kansas, this is all of Kansas, we saw 27% turnout. In voter to voter, we saw a 60% turnout. In the general, you can see it was 56 and 82. And then we have these other numbers here, the 0 of 4, the 1 of 4. That's what I was talking about with the propensity score. So a 0 of 4 means they're a non-voter, or that they didn't vote in these last 4 elections, maybe because they were apathetic, they didn't know how, they didn't know about the issues, or maybe they weren't 18 yet. Then we have the low propensity, which is 1 of 4s, your 2 of 4s. And again, maybe they just turned 18, or they just need a little bit of nudging. And you can see here, among the low props, low propensity voters, we had a much higher turnout overall. But we understand that an app is not going to solve turnout by itself. So we do have this suite of tools, but we also have staff support to help the ambassadors be successful. We only have an idea still of what COVID-19 will mean for August and for the November elections, so that we are pushing vote by mail in Kansas because it's easy, but it'll be new and it'll be intimidating for a lot of people. This is a great way to reach your friends, reach family, reach coworkers, people you know, and talk to them about voting by mail, talk to them about registering for their advance ballot. In the tool, you can track the status of the advance ballot, and then you can follow up with your friend. For infrequent voters, a lot of times, voting takes a backseat to childcare or to sick kids or car trouble or to work. So talk to your friends, make a plan, and this helps ambassadors have a longer window to help their friends get out and vote. Talked a little bit earlier about ksballot.org, and as I mentioned, that is your one-stop shop for everything on your ballot. You can read up on your candidates as you see here, find your election day polling place, locations where you could vote early, even a place that you could click to register, and then the most important thing is you can make a plan to vote. You can create and print a sample ballot, and then you can sign up to get voting reminders. These are just an overview of our teams. When we put this slide together, and that was about a month ago, when we put the presentation together, we had about 8,800 voters in the system. We are closer to 10,000 now, and we expect to be at 20,000 after the November general. So we're going full steam ahead, and you can see here we have a really nice cross section of different teams. And that's what's listed here for you. So how about some friendly competition? I'm sure you guys would like to stick it to Roland Park, right? I'm sure you'd like to come out on top, have some bragging rights. I said the same thing to them about Mission when I presented to Roland Park. What we're looking for is an increase in turnout over the 2016 election. That's one of the metrics we're looking at using. Another one is a percent increase of the low propensity voters that I talked about earlier that are in the tool. And we want you to recruit as many community stakeholders and volunteer ambassadors into the effort as possible, and then who can motivate new and low propensity voters to participate, especially in November. When I talked earlier about teams, this is kind of an overview of what that could look like. City of Mission right here would be the overarching team. Underneath, you could have some different sub-teams. Let's say you wanted to do a competition between different, the city departments or governing body and the citizen committees. However you'd like to structure that. The more teams you have, the more sub-teams you have, the more ambassadors you have, the more voters you have in the system, and the better chances of getting some really robust citizen participation and voter engagement. And with that, I hope I didn't take too long. I probably went too fast, but I yield for questions.
Hey, I have a quick question, and I appreciate the presentation, Michael. It's good to hear from you.
Of course, hi.
I'm just wondering, I kind of brought this up when Trent brought his thing up too. I think it's great to encourage voter turnout. I'm wondering what kind of stuff you guys are doing in the more local election cycles, because to me, that's where it seems like we really, really struggle to get people out to the polls. And I mean, I'm all for this effort, but I really hope that it carries on to the non-presidential election years, I guess is kind of where I'm at.
That's a great point, Councilmember. And yes, we launched this in 2018, but we saw some of the same results in 2019 at the municipal level using the voter-to-voter tool. We almost doubled turnout within our tool in 2019. So we're going to continue this on every year, and hopefully we just keep growing and growing. It's a lot easier to get people excited, or unfortunately, it's a lot easier to get people excited or engaged during presidential election years, right? Because that's all you hear about.
Sure.
And so we're hoping, oh, right. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, that's kind of my point. Like, what can we do? How do you think we can try to encourage some of this stuff to get people more excited in non-presidential election years?
Well, we're hoping to use the momentum from this year to then encourage people to stay involved in the system. We talk to our ambassadors year round. So once you are an ambassador with voter to voter, we're going to keep in contact with you. We're going to remind you, hey, it's time to start talking to your team again. Hey, what do you need from us to be successful? We have workshops throughout the year, different toolkits for our ambassadors. And so that's the power of the tool lies in the power of relationships, really. And so when you keep those relationships alive with your team members, with your voters, then they have a better chance of getting out to vote, because a lot of them don't even know that you're tracking them in the tool, right? They just know that you care enough to talk to them about voting.
Great.
Debbie, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Trent.
Michael, thanks for that presentation. And just for clarification for the rest of the body, it's my understanding when we spoke about this, that the point system, we would get credit only for the folks in mission we track and receive. And at that, it's the lower propensity folks even who we're really wanting to try to target. Could you just kind of confirm that for us?
Correct, yes. We're looking to keep this city specific.
Cool. Yeah, so on the heels of the voting resolution that we passed last couple of weeks, I think, one of the language, some of the language in there was for us to get creative to kind of expand access and encourage our residents to vote. And so I'd like to see us as a city explore this and develop some teams and, hopefully come out on top in Northeast Joco.
So Michael, what would our next step be?
So next step would be deciding that you would like to participate. We will have, we're getting some dates together. It'll be about the third week in July that we'll do a team lead training. And then we will do a city to city kickoff, probably that next week. So it'll be a webinar, obviously, where we'll get on and we'll kick off the whole program, give everyone the toolkits that they need to succeed, go over any last minute questions. And we have a plethora of other training opportunities that are already on the books.
So representatives for this particular group come from the community at large, city, staff, how's that work?
Sure, so let me go back here because I don't think I was clear when I was explaining this, I apologize.
That's all right.
You're still seeing my screen, correct?
Yes.
Little pyramid. Okay. So the way that we envision it and we think with the way we think it'll work best is if the governing body is one of the teams, and probably the main team, with either the mayor or the appointed lead from the governing body being the team leader for that team.
Mhm.
Then each of the governing body members would then get 5 to 10 people under them. So you're all the ambassadors, and then you would get 5 to 10 people under you. I mean, it's a pyramid scheme for good, right? You can see how this is exponentially, it grows to get more and more people involved in the voting process.
Sure.
And then you would then look up those individuals in the voter-to-voter tool, and you would find their propensity scores. All of this information that we have is public. We pull it down, all the raw data straight from the Secretary of State office. Anyone can access it. It's just, you have to pay for it. So we're taking out the middleman, and we're giving the power back to the people by making it available for free.
It is free, right?
Yes. Our program is 100% free. We're funded by majority by Kansas Health Foundations like Reach and Health Forward.
Okay.
And so that's why we're able to offer this at no cost.
Great. Does anybody have a comment or question for Michael about moving forward, or any reservation? Please speak now. Do I hear a recommendation to take it to the next level?
I'll recommend it.
Okay. Michael, great presentation. We look forward to
Thank
speaking
you.
with you later. Looks like
Excellent. Thank you so much again.
you are welcome. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks for
Bye.
joining us. Okay, that was great. Let's move on to our action items. I indicated early on that we had 4. We actually have 3 and 1 discussion item. So let's move forward with our action items. Number 1 would be the acceptance of the June 3rd, 2020 Finance and Administration Committee minutes. Audrey McClanahan.
Hi, yes. Presented to you are the June 3rd, 2020 Finance and Administration Committee meeting minutes for your approval. Thank you.
Do I have a recommendation? Or any
Recommend
questions?
accept.
I'm sorry.
I recommend that we accept.
Great. Okay, any other comments? Okay, we'll move forward. That will go forward. The next action item we have is on surplus property resolution, and that would be Brian Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have one item on our surplus property resolution, and that is 25 chairs that are currently in the City Hall lobby. These chairs have been there for a long time. They're starting to show their age. There's quite a few stains and so forth in the upholstery. So we'd like to go ahead and dispose of those chairs. And what's really kind of driving this is the fact that we're going to be opening up for court here next week. And so we'd like to take the chairs that are in the council chambers right now and use some of those and kind of position them around the lobby just to provide a little better social distancing for those that are attending court.
Sure.
So that resolution is on your agenda for consideration tonight.
Madam Chair?
Sure, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I would go ahead and recommend that we put this on consent.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, let's move forward on the consent agenda with the declaration of surplus equipment. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Okay, our last action item, and this is coming forward from our last meeting, is on Racial Equity and Social Justice Council and Community Conversations. It was a resolution that was put forward last month, and we had a lot of dialogue on it, and we have come to some understanding that we're going to move forward in how we're looking at this particular item. And Laura Smith is going to go ahead and give us an overview on where we've come and what our next steps are, please.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Crane. So as you mentioned, a couple of weeks ago, we had a very spirited and passionate debate as we discussed a resolution that had been introduced. And that's captioned below. I won't read all of that. I think we're all familiar with that. But although that resolution wasn't adopted that evening at the June City Council meeting, I really believe that we share much more common ground around the substance of these really crucial issues than what it may have seemed at that meeting. And so it is important, I think, to really try to reframe this conversation. Important because of the relationships that we have with each other, with our employees, and really with our entire community. So the mayor and I had the opportunity to kind of reflect and, you know, over the conversations and the work that we'd been doing internally and the action steps that we had been considering, and realized we could have been more proactive in communicating that information to the entire governing body. Perhaps if we'd done that, we may have avoided some of the concerns that were expressed at that meeting a couple of weeks ago. And I also took the opportunity to visit with council members Thomas and Flora, who introduced the resolution, to try to think about, make sure that I had a very clear understanding of their goals and objectives, and making sure in the areas where I thought they really aligned with those internal conversations and the work that we had been doing, and where we might, again, find that common ground and come back and put a plan together for us as our community. So I think most of you know that the mayor and Chief Hadley put out a statement immediately following the death of, or not immediately, but close to the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, and just really acknowledging for our residents and our employees that we felt that we had an obligation to engage in conversations around issues of racial equity and accountability, implicit bias, a number of things, and that we would be committed to doing so. You know, I think it's important, and I think part of our conversation from a couple of weeks ago, both in our verbal conversation and in the letter that council members Thomas and Flora provided to the rest of the governing body, that acknowledging the need to have the conversation and the desire to have the conversation has never been intended to be a condemnation or an attack on our own Mission Police Department. But it is through these conversations that we have a chance to really educate ourselves more fully and understand where we have areas for improvement. It's a matter of accountability that we really owe to ourselves and to our community. And we can't commit to any specific actions or changes until we undertake those first two opportunities to educate ourselves and understand. So in my conversations with many of you, I feel like that you want to see action on the substance of these issues and to make a commitment to take action as we go forward as it relates to the impacts of racial inequity and social injustice on our city operations. As I mentioned, I talked with Hillary and Solly, and I think that I can align, as I tried to do in the action item, their goals and objectives and the resolution that had been proposed with the action plan that staff had been working on internally. And that's a plan that the chief and I, command staff and others in the organization have been in conversation on and working to put together over the last month or so. So rather than, I know we talked about at that meeting 2 weeks ago, bringing the resolution back for kind of a rework or wordsmithing, and rather than do that, I think that we can make really just kind of respect and preserve the values surrounding all of these issues by taking a slightly different approach. One of the things that I know that council members Thomas and Flora felt was important, or at least wanted to give the opportunity to the entire governing body to do, was to join with the mayor and the chief in condemning the actions and the inaction of the Minneapolis police officers, and what happened, excuse me, what happened in the unnecessary death of George Floyd. And so we've tried to approach that and rework that in the form of a statement that the governing body could consider and either look at adoption through a formal vote, or a statement that is simply made available for any members of the governing body to sign at their individual discretion. So a copy of, or a draft of a statement was included action item, and I won't read that in its entirety, but what I'd like to do is kind of walk through the remaining action steps, and then we can open it up for kind of discussion and questions surrounding that. The next action step that we've contemplated would be to come back to you in August to start that conversation and that education around the current policies, practices, and experiences of our police department. And not only to educate you as the governing body, but to provide greater visibility and information on these topics to the public. We would typically suggest the August committee meeting, but Chief Hadley is going to be on vacation for that meeting date, and certainly he is a critical part of this conversation. So before we conclude our meeting tonight, I would hope that we might be able to look at some calendars and select an alternative date in August where we would have the opportunity to start a review of policies, many of the ones coming from the 8 Can't Wait questions and information that has been circulating and shared by a number of communities, both in the metro and across the country. And also taking the opportunity in August to share specific data on the department's use of force, complaints that have been received, including what our investigation process is for complaints, and demographic statistics that are reflective of our department activity over the last 10 years. Certainly, as we move through any of these action steps, it would not be our intent that these would be one and done meetings, but we wanted to create a structure over the next several months that we could kind of move through the majority of these topics. And then as there were additional questions, where there were areas where people wanted to take a deeper dive into some of these things, we can certainly reschedule those. And then the next action step would be to come back to you in September and to look at the processes, systems, and structures which exist within the city, the county, and the state to promote accountability and transparency in law enforcement. And again, to make that information more readily available to the public. I think one of the things that we talked about 2 weeks ago was that accountability is an important value for our entire organization, from the mayor and council to each and every employee who represents the city of Mission. And while we are starting, because of the current circumstances, with a review of accountability measures associated with law enforcement, the expectations and discussions have to extend throughout our organization, top to bottom, across all of our departments. So we would plan to come back at the September 2nd Finance and Administration Committee meeting to present information on these issues, along with a recap or information on our hiring processes and the training requirements for our Mission police officers. Part of the language, and I would imagine will be part of our conversations in September, is the role of independent oversight and review boards. That's certainly a part of the conversation occurring around the subject of accountability. One of the things that we are doing now is collecting information on the various types of review boards that currently exist, particularly here in the metro area, and what you'll find and come to understand when we have the opportunity to present that is that there are many communities that are using independent review boards, but they're using them at various places in the processes. And so we want to be able to present to you kind of those options and alternatives as we think about whether that is something that would make sense for our Mission community. Again, if we have additional questions, an opportunity or a desire for more review, we can schedule additional meetings and follow-up action steps. Next plan of action would be to be more effective in engaging people of color in our community in the conversations. so that we can be more effective in building relationships and sustaining that dialogue into the future. Again, this is not a one-time pass to have this conversation. This is a step through that doorway of building that long-term. And in order to start that process, we would suggest that we hold a community forum in October of this year to open up that dialogue and start to collect that information. And really, collecting information as it relates to sort of the racial equity or inequity issues, specifically with respect to law enforcement, but also an expanded conversation as that might apply to things like housing, education, access to services, or other issues or concerns. The goal of that forum would be to listen, to understand, and to, again, build relationships with these communities whose voice has always not been present in our conversations. We pushed the community forum to October because we felt it was important to give ourselves sufficient time to ensure that that forum could be successful. We feel that it needs to occur in person if we can accomplish that, and certainly facing some of the COVID-19 restrictions, that's been a challenge. Our hope would be that later this fall we would have an opportunity to be able to accomplish an in-person forum and still adhere to any recommended COVID-19 safety precautions. I know that the Johnson County NAACP hosted an online or a virtual forum on June 25th, I believe it was. And I feel like it was a very successful format and served its purpose for that larger scale of kind of broad look at the entire county. But I do feel like that an in-person forum is certainly very important for us in our community. But more importantly than being able to meet in person, I think we need time to identify the resources, the voices, the experts who can help us create kind of the safe and inviting space within which to engage in these sensitive conversations. I know one of the concerns or questions raised by Councilmember Rothrock at our meeting 2 weeks ago was whether or not we involved any persons of color in crafting of the resolution or of the action plan. And I have, at least we have gone back and had the opportunity to visit specifically with her, and I believe, and she can chime in if she disagrees with me, but I believe that we've put together a plan that she feels will help start us down this path. And I think she is absolutely interested in making sure that this is a process that we can sustain and continue well into the future. And then finally, the last action step of our plan involves ongoing training and education for elected officials and all employees related to implicit bias, race, and inequity as soon as we can, but no later than the first quarter of 2021. Again, these are issues that apply not only to our Mission Police Department, but to the entire organization. And we have to be willing to put in the work to train and discuss and embrace those conversations around that. So that is kind of the action plans, or at least the beginning steps of an action plan that we have laid out and would present, and would certainly be available to answer any questions.
Can I ask a clarification question?
Go ahead, Ken. Go ahead.
What is BIPOC?
Black and Indigenous Persons of Color.
Thank you.
Laura, will we be able to put this information in a timeline on our website too, to give the community at large an understanding of where we're going in what direction?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Hey, Debbie?
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to echo what Laura's saying, that 2 weeks ago we did have a very spirited, emotional debate But whenever you get 9 people with a governing body together, you're going to have divergent views, perspectives. But I never doubted that we were all heading in the same direction, which is this plan. Like Laura said, we had been discussing the plan or skeleton of the plan of how we wanted to move forward. We just didn't have enough details to kind of unveil it. And I wish we had maybe talked about the plan, even though we didn't have details. But I think it's good to have divergent opinions. I think the discussion was good. And if it gets us to where we need to go, then I think that was a very productive meeting. So I think this plan is comprehensive. It's not like I say, a one shot. It is a philosophy for our organization. And when we get to the end, I think we will have accomplished our objectives. So.
I totally agree. I think it's a comprehensive way of looking at this in an action-oriented method versus just in words, because the words fall short if people aren't totally engaged and involved, and how we can change our community and make it even better. I think this is a great way to do it. Comments from people?
Yeah, Debbie, I just had one reminder for members of the public that if you have any related statements, if you're interested in this action item, you can put your comments or questions in the chat and we can either read them or Debbie can call on you from the chat feature. And then I just wanted to make one apology and then say one thing related to this item. I just wanted to reach out again to Councilmember Rothrock for not reaching out in connection with the drafting of the resolution. I did reach out to her before we had our discussions, but not in the drafting stage. So I just wanted to apologize for that oversight. I value her input on this and other issues. And then I hope that we can all move forward together on the substance and reach an understanding that, like Laura said, this is about, accountability to both ourselves, our police department, and the public. And it's not an attack on our police. It's the start of conversations that really need to be had.
Good job.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I echo the same sentiment as you all have stated before. And I'm really excited to keep pushing forward with the things that we've already done and revamp new ways of improving areas that we might have overlooked or just really pushing forward with this. So, and while I have the floor, I really do like this plan. I agree it's very comprehensive and action oriented. Something that I would like to see, and forgive me if it's already in here in some other form or fashion, but just how we highlight the things that we already do with the community for all ages. I'd like to see just whenever we have anything on the agenda or whenever we're having discussions even, just highlighted or recognized that, this is something that we're doing and it promotes what we've been working on and what we've talked about. And you can look forward to this happening every year, or just really highlighting those things so that it spreads that awareness of what we're doing and its contributions to our overall goal with this plan.
Great. Other comments?
Message heard and received, council member.
Debbie?
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks for allowing me to comment on this. I was lucky enough the last couple of weeks to have some conversations with some leaders of color, both locally and across the state. And just in my discussions with them, I think the sentiment is that they're excited to see us talking about this. They think it's important. And I just reading this draft tonight and looking at everything, I'm proud of the work that's gone into getting us to this point. And I look forward to this conversation. And I know just the last few weeks have been a chance for some self-reflection on my own. And so I look forward to continuing to learn and wanting to move the ball forward here. So thanks for everybody's work up until this point.
Okay, we do have a comment on the chat feature from Crystal. It says to everyone, I greatly appreciated Councilmember Rothrock's public statement after the last meeting. I am incredibly encouraged by this conversation and action moving forward. You all's ability to grow and work through issues with restoration is clear. Okay, do we have any other comments or any?
Debbie, do you mind if
Debbie,
I make a comment?
Go ahead, Chief. Go.
Oh, yeah.
I will unpause myself. As your police chief, I said a couple weeks ago that all of us are elected by the people and we all work for the people in the community. I honestly believe that. I know some of my command staff is on tonight. We're actually excited to have these meetings and educate people. We have the Citizens Academy every year, every 2 years, and sometimes we struggle to even get it filled. So this is an opportunity for us to educate several people, not just in our community, but from around. And we're excited to have those conversations and hear from everybody and to talk about what we do and if changes need to be made or what the community wants. So I just wanted to express my feelings that I appreciate the action item coming forward and that the council and the mayor and Laura Smith have all done a really good job, in my opinion, of bringing this together in the last 2 weeks.
Thanks for your
Thank
leadership. Anybody else have any comments? Go ahead, Solly.
Yeah, I just had one follow-up. Thank you, Chief, for your statement, and I really appreciated your support of the resolution in its first form and your full support of this action plan. I do still think a statement from the full council would be really important and a good signal to our community. So my recommendation would be that we move the statement forward as an item on behalf of the whole governing body rather than just inviting signatures, but I'd be curious what others think on that.
This is Ken Davis. Debbie?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I support that statement as well, and I support the suggestion that Councilmember Flora has put forward. I'd also say thank you to all that put a lot of effort into this to bring it to this point. I think that we all should take pride in what has been done, and the fact that this is the beginning step toward really increasing our sensitivity and awareness of ourselves in relationship to our community. And so for that, I am really pleased with what we're doing, and I would certainly urge that we move the statement forward as a statement from the council.
And Solly, do you see this as a statement in the resolution as you presented before, or the statement on the website, or how do you foresee this coming about?
Yeah, I would see it, I guess, as the statement that Laura has included. I'm comfortable with the version that's in our packet here tonight. I would just like to see it move forward in a way that it would be signed by the governing body as a whole, if everyone is comfortable with that, rather than, signed by individual members voluntarily. I'd like to see it as an act of our governing body, but open to hear others' thoughts on that.
Comments from people?
This is RC. Sorry. I agree. I'd like to see that as a whole of our governing body. And then I had one other follow-up, I guess, request that in number 4, whenever we do hold that, whenever we host a community forum, whether it be in October or whenever we can find a date, I just want to make sure, and I can say this closer to the time as well, but that we create an opportunity for anyone who maybe may not feel comfortable speaking or even submitting their questions, comments, and feelings. I know that we have the chat ability, but I do want to make sure that we have an opportunity, whether it looks like someone submitting a form beforehand, or if anybody hears this and they would like to reach out, I don't mind coming forward with anything for anyone else. So I just want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable and included in that forum.
Thank you, RC. Okay, any other feedback? Does anybody want to see how the statement's going to evolve, or do we want to do it verbatim as to what's put in the document we have at hand? What's your preference?
I'm comfortable with how it is, but if anyone else has edits.
I'm comfortable as well.
Okay. Go ahead. Ken, anything?
No, I'm fine with the way it's written. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so we will move to aspire to that statement at some point. Laura, do you have any feedback for us as to how to get this through?
So what I would suggest, and if you are interested in making that a statement of the council as a whole, then we would just advance that. And I think someone would make that motion and we'll present that statement at your council meeting in July. Sorry, there's a fly in my buzzing around my head. And then we'll just present it as an action item on that agenda.
Okay, is that good with everybody?
Yeah, I'd say non-consent.
Yeah, I think we should definitely put on non-consent, but I'm good with that.
Right. Okay, well, let's move that forward to the next meeting. And I think this has been a great dialogue. I'm very optimistic.
I think Hillary had one question, maybe Debbie.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Hillary.
Thank you. Not a question, just a comment and a thank you to Laura to once again working her magic in her ability to wordsmith, but ultimately bring people together and helping all of us find the common ground that reminds us there's more that unites us than divides us. I believe that. And anyways, I'm grateful for this process, despite it not looking necessarily as comfortable as any of us want it to be. I'm grateful and thankful to Laura.
Thank you. I appreciate that, but it's, like I said, I think I know you all well enough to know there was more common ground, and it is such an important topic for all of us. It is worth investing whatever time it takes to get us there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to our discussion item then, please. We have a discussion item tonight on the mandatory mask ordinance, and this will be Laura Smith. I did want to say before we get to the chat component that Hillary and I did have an email from Robin Folks today in support of Mission adopting an ordinance with the mandatory masks. So I'll get to that comment after we go through this, Laura. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I know that several of you, and the reason this was put on as a discussion item this evening is because I know several of you had been receiving email correspondence from constituents asking you to consider a mandatory mask ordinance or requirement within our city. After we published the agenda, we learned that Governor Kelly will be issuing an executive order, which will not be coming out until tomorrow, that will make mask wearing mandatory on a statewide basis. That executive order, as we understand it, will also be discussed by the Johnson County Board of County Commissioners, who had originally intended to give themselves a vacation from their regular Thursday meetings tomorrow morning, I think because of the July 4th holiday, but they have called a special meeting and will be meeting at 10 a.m. tomorrow specifically to discuss the mask ordinance issue. So we really wanted to this is continuing to evolve. And so we wanted to at least get this out in front of everyone, have some preliminary conversation. We are poised internally to, with our incident command team, which includes Emily Randel, Chief Hadley, Brian Scott, and Rob Myers, and Dan Madden, we've been meeting twice a week since the whole COVID-19 situation started to just talk about responses and reactions to all of that. We're kind of standing at the ready to understand what happens with the executive order and the Board of County Commissioners meeting, and then be prepared to present you with some information about specific impacts or implications for our community. As we understand it, with some of the legislative changes that were made when the legislature came back into session in late May, counties will have an opportunity to modify statewide orders. So there is the potential for the county to do something either more restrictive or less restrictive than what the governor's executive order would include. I think the biggest issue that we've talked about all along, and prior to all of this, was thinking about enforcement. And I knew that Chief Hadley had a meeting or a conversation with the other Johnson County chiefs earlier today to start to talk about that. I think it's safe characterization to say that the plan has not been, an enforcement plan has not been specifically formulated or communicated. I understand, and the chief can jump in here, but I understand the county anticipates potentially creating a hotline so that any calls related to mask ordinance violations would be funneled through a hotline, and then I'm assuming distributed out to the police department in whatever community that call originated from. I think there's just going to be a variety, similar to some of the issues that we were looking at when we were in the phase of non-essential, essential versus non-essential businesses and potential enforcement there. I think the enforcement is going to come back to communities at the local level. But again, it's very difficult to sort of speculate and think about what that might look like as we sit here this evening, because we just don't know any of the details of either the statewide order or what the county would plan to do. So really would just like to maybe entertain a little bit of discussion so that staff has some guidance, and when that information does become available tomorrow, that we can then move quickly to think about options and alternatives for mission.
Debbie?
Everybody just go ahead and talk. You're fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about this in terms of our business licensing process and whether or not it might be a better way for us to work with the businesses themselves, that this is an expectation for the enforcement by the businesses. And then secondarily, if there are issues, then the police can be asked to intervene when necessary. But it seems to me that the expectation, if it is implemented, that it be implemented in, the expectation is the establishments that are licensed in Mission would be expected to enforce it themselves within their organizations. I have been monitoring a lot of the discussion on Nextdoor, and there are a lot of debates that have been going on around this issue of mask and use of mask. And it seems that there are some establishments that are not doing anything in terms of social distancing and are not using masks or anything protective by their employees. And those are the elements that I think that we need to address as a city in terms of our licensing of businesses.
Let me just put something in there real quickly. I just for framework of thought, what would the penalty be if someone doesn't? I just get worried about our small businesses with the onus on them to enforce what they want in their business. Would they throw someone out? Would there be a fine? Would there be jail? Everything that we aspire to has an action associated with it. So I kind of need a better understanding, maybe from Chief, what would the expectation be if someone doesn't wear a mask?
So until the order comes out tomorrow, nobody is 100% sure. Laura had mentioned that there's a hotline. I was told this morning that Johnson County would operate a hotline. As far as any kind of an action, there was, and I'm going to be honest, there was a lot of struggles between the state, the county, the cities on enforcement of businesses that should or should not be open, and what does that process look like. I will tell you that we did not have very many issues at all. A lot of it was education. You go and talk to a business. Nobody was cited in the city of Mission for operating a business that the governor said shouldn't be open. I will tell you that from what the chiefs and I had discussed this morning, This is another educational piece. It is not so much about masks as it is that private businesses have the right to call the police if somebody comes in to their business and is not wearing a mask. Now, when we arrive, again, it's educational. Not everybody is going to know about the executive order. So to me, it's about education. And I will tell you that every other police chief thought the same this morning and are having the same conversations with their councils and their management. Years ago, when the gun laws came into place, we started getting phone calls about what do I do if somebody comes in open carry, which is legal in the state of Kansas. It's not about the gun. It's about the person being in the business. If the owner of the business or the person responsible for the business management says that they don't want that person in the business, then that's what it's about. It's a trespassing issue. So it's not so much about a gun or a mask as it was years ago. And that's how it is for us. So if we get a call and we respond and a business owner doesn't want somebody in there, it's not so much about the mask. It's you need to leave. So again, to us, it's all about education. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure that law enforcement going out and citing people for not wearing a mask is really good public relations right now in the world that we're in. One of the things that I was told was it could be civil action taken through district court, and the fine could be up to $2,500. But there is no process in line right now, and that's something that once the orders come out tomorrow, the Attorney General looks at it, gives his opinion, and we're waiting on the County Commission tomorrow to have their meeting. So there's a lot of things in motion, and there are no answers really yet until those things happen. But Laura has been talking with us, and we are trying to evaluate all the plans moving forward. But until the order comes out, we don't know what it's going to say or what the county's going to do or the Attorney General.
Thank you so much, Chief. Okay,
Yep.
Hillary has a question, Sully has a question, and then Ann on the chat feature said, thank you for making this an educational item. It is not about punishing people. Hillary, go ahead.
Thanks. So I know that we need to have a thorough conversation about what enforcement looks like, and I don't want to live in hypotheticals, but I think there's a really strong chance that the county tomorrow will overrule the state order. So my question is for the council, is there an interest in having a mission specific ordinance? And is that something that my fellow council members is interested in entertaining if that happens? And again, I know it's hypothetical, but it is tomorrow and it could happen.
Sully.
Yeah, my comment was actually going to be very similar to Hillary's, kind of reading the tea leaves. It looks like it could easily be, a 4-3 vote of the commission in either direction, or I guess there's 3 directions: either uphold, the governor's executive order in its entirety, say the county is not doing it at all, or make some watered down, semi version of the governor's order. And so, yeah, I think we should be prepared for either the watering down or the rejection of the governor's order. And I would like to see, in that case, an ordinance come forward in Mission, and for us to work with neighboring cities in Northeast Johnson County, including, I would also throw in there Overland Park, since we do touch borders, for coordinated city action, and, prepare a special meeting of council to that effect.
Okay. Nick, do you have a question?
Yeah, I would be for drafting up some sort of rules and stuff for any of the mission public buildings and municipal buildings, so city hall or court, anything like that. But I absolutely am unequivocally against forcing our businesses to require this. I totally encourage that they do. I know that the city has some resources to help them with signage and everything else. I personally have a mask, I wear it, but I'm not at all in favor of enforcing that upon businesses, and especially putting the onus on them to potentially have to be the ones to call the police if somebody refuses to wear a mask or whatever. I think it's good practice for them to require it. They've got mechanisms in place already where they can deal with it, but I think it's a big overstep of the council to enforce any kind of mandate like that. I think, frankly, the governor has done a big overstep of that too. We should do it in our public buildings, but private businesses should have some decision on that themselves. And I guess that's my 2 cents. So an ordinance to enforce, within our municipal buildings, I'm all for it, but I'm not in favor at all of putting something in place on our businesses. If the county does it, then the county does it, but that's where I
I
stand.
agree with Nick's statement.
Okay, Trent, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just curious, if we did go down the road of kind of drafting something city specific, if we could maybe coordinate or talk with the Northeast Johnson County Chamber of Commerce too along those lines. And I know they've been kind of talking about this and had some recommendations as well. So perhaps we could sort of get their buy-in, or at least, kind of understand kind of where their head's at too. And also, if we were to do this, I would like to see it somehow. In an ideal world, it would be nice to have it uniform, or at least pretty consistent with what neighboring cities are doing as well. So that way there would be kind of a consistency if there was to be any enforcement. I don't want to see, kind of echoing Chief's comments, this turning into a severe criminality or fine element. But I do think from a public health perspective, this is absolutely necessary if the county overturns this, and I want to see us do this just from the safety of everybody around us. The immunocompromised, what our public health officers are saying. I think this is a time to really listen to the science, and I want to have us, be good stewards of that, as much as it's uncomfortable or silly for some of us to wear. I mean, I know I would prefer not to wear one if I could, but I am, because that's what the science is telling us. So I hope that somehow we're able to kind of come to a consensus and a good faith effort, based on the science, and we have good buy-in from that perspective. So
Thank you, Trent. We have a couple comments. We have one from Roman Garcia to everyone. 2 weeks ago in the 66202 zip code, we had 37 positive cases of COVID-19. Now we have 66 positive cases. Clearly, this is a growing problem. A mask mandate would help to keep people safe, encourage shopping locally, and decrease the spread of the disease before school starts in the fall. Anne says to everyone, great point, Roman. There are already mask ordinances in neighboring cities, Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas.
Debbie,
Yes, go ahead, Ron. Sure.
What would happen if Johnson County takes a vote and decides they are not going to adopt Governor Kelly's executive order? What are our choices then? Follow the county, follow the state, or do our own thing? Is that, Laura?
Yes, I think, we'd really have to explore what those are, but I believe we would still have the option. We would look at what that option would be for our own, or if we would have the ability to enforce the state orders outside of the decision that the county made. So it's just, they're kind of a series of different paths that we'll have to just evaluate once we see what happens. I think Council Member Thomas had asked a question about, do I know what other Northeast Johnson County cities are considering? I haven't reached out specifically. I think that the mayor in Prairie Village commented that if the county were not to uphold the governor's order, that he was going to advance a conversation in Prairie Village to consider doing something on their own. But that's part of the legwork that we'll have to do tomorrow. I'm sure there will be a lot of information circulating among our Northeast Johnson County cities in terms of, plans of action. And again, very similar to where we were a couple of months ago with, who and how determinations were made on essential businesses and who was going to be doing what and making the interpretations and handling the enforcement and what the penalties were. So we'll have to dust off some of that research that we did at that time and see if any of that applies in this situation, or what our alternatives might be.
Okay. So the effort now would be to see what happens tomorrow with the county and then move from that point, do you think?
Yeah, I think absolutely we need to see what happens tomorrow, and we can, put together some information, depending on what happens. There may be a need for us to consider a special meeting. If there's something else that we want to just, discuss or consider, rather than holding it for 2 weeks for your, regular legislative meeting. Because if what I'm seeing is holding true, that in some places, they'll be evaluating in 2 weeks' time, they'll be evaluating whether or not the mandatory mask requirements stay in place, right?
Right.
So I think that if we decide we want to consider or look at this, then I think we're going to need to move very timely on it, because the cases are increasing and you're seeing the spikes now. So,
okay, you guys will not be there on Friday. If something comes out tomorrow, would we be able to put together a special meeting tomorrow afternoon via Zoom?
I think it would be challenging for us to get the notice requirements out. I mean, typically we like to, there's no specific legal requirement on the notice, but we've always wanted to try to give at least a 24-hour notice for that from the public's perspective. So, what we've done, we typically meet, our internal group typically meets in the morning, and we've pushed our meeting the afternoon so that we can get through. I don't know what time we anticipate the governor will release her executive order. So I don't know if that will come out before the BOCC meets. It's my understanding that the BOCC couldn't get all of their members together tomorrow afternoon, and the chairman did not want to have a meeting without all of their members present, which is why they're meeting in the morning tomorrow.
Could we tentatively set something up for a work session on Wednesday night? Or is
I
that
think
too-
Monday night, if we're going to do anything.
Yeah, the sooner the better.
Yeah, I think you want to look at probably Monday.
Okay. Does everybody's schedule allow that?
I mean, Debbie, we have sustainability, but I assume they'd let us have a pass.
You can be flexible.
Emily will be the rep. Okay, so based on our conversation here, do we want to wait until tomorrow and maybe Laura will reconnect with us after we get comments from the BOCC as well as the governor's statement?
Yes, we can do that. And then if we need to call a special meeting, we can circulate those documents electronically and get the signatures that we need, and that will give us an opportunity to get that posted, and then we would look at that. So what time would you want to do? 6 o'clock on Monday? Does that give everyone sufficient time?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Monday's fine.
Okay.
Debbie, can I say one more thing?
Sure, sure.
I would also like to, I know that we're living in hypotheticals, but with whatever decisions or discussions we have, I would really like to make sure that either chief or command staff have the opportunity to provide details around what resource availability or how that impacts what we've already got going on in our daily operations. So
Right.
Thank you.
That's great. Everybody on board with this process? Does anybody have any concerns?
Well, I think, yeah, and I think we have to talk about it, because I think you're going to have the expectation of folks in our community who, depending on what direction it goes, people are going to be looking to us to provide that direction. So we can certainly get that information pulled together and get that back out to you. And this conversation around that made me realize we didn't talk about August dates for our conversation, to kick off our conversation around the racial equity and social justice issues. But what I would recommend is let me send an email with some suggested dates and times. It's probably more efficient, and then let you all just weigh in on I'm available here or there, and then we can agree on a time that way if that works for you.
Excellent. Okay, let's move forward to wait to hear from you tomorrow after we get the two entities defined around what they want to do. And let's close this with the department updates. Do we have anything, Laura?
I think that the only thing we have is Emily was going to share the 30, 60, 90-day action plan from Crux. So.
I mean, raise your hand if you want to hear about it.
Or we can.
I can send it via email. I could do
or
that.
We can send it via email if you want, and then you can ask us questions. Would you rather do it that way since we're at
yes.
9:30? Okay.
Yeah, great. Sorry, Emily.
No worries.
Okay, if anybody.
Debbie, I think there is one more comment in the chat, Debbie.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Solly. From Beth to everyone, I believe that while nobody will be excited about a mask order being put in place, a mask requirement when you are outside of your home will be very important in helping to control the effect of the virus in our community. It is apparent by the recently increasing numbers that allowing the general populace the choice to not wear a mask has not been effective in controlling the virus. I really hope that even if just Mission standing alone, we will all as a city make the statement that we are willing to do the hard work to keep the community safe. Thank you, Beth. Okay, we ready to move? We going to sleep? Okay. Go ahead. Anybody have anything last minute comments?
No, I think that we're on the right track, and I think we have a little bit of difference even on the council in terms of our approach to this, and I'm more conservative in terms of healthcare. Having lost a lung, I feel very vulnerable, and I think that it's important for us to protect our community and those that are more susceptible.
Thank you, Ken. Okay, we are now closing the Finance and Administration Committee at 9:31 p.m. Have a great rest of the evening, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.